G'day, my name's Chris and welcome to this episode of Renewable News in Australia and sometimes around the globe. On today's show, electric car sales continue to climb in Australia, why not going EV will result in poorer health, loss of jobs and bad things for the environment, how electric vehicles benefit all ratepayers, and I dispel the argument that EVs and associated infrastructure subsidies are not a bad thing. Alright, is that right, not a bad thing? Okay, if you're new to the channel, welcome. And for returning subscribers, thanks for your support. It really helps the channel and it makes what I'm doing not only rewarding, but hopefully informs, entertains, and gets the truth behind what unfortunately can be a lot of misinformation out there. Speaking of which, and I don't want to start the show off with like an example of diluted publishing, but Jason Hayes from the McMahon Centre for Public Policy published an article on their website titled "Taxing the Poor to Pay for Your Electric Car." Really? No. Okay, wait. Before I break down why this is so wrong, particularly in Australia, know that the McMahon Centre is a non-profit institute that advances the principles of free markets and limited government. Through their research and education, they challenge government overreach and advocate for free market approaches to public policy that free people to realize their potential and their dreams. Good stuff. All right, so in Mr. Hayes' article, he details why EV charging infrastructure is wealth transfer from everyday ratepayers to wealthy EV owners. Noting to encourage electric car adoption, and electricity consumers are forced to pay for charging infrastructure and continued subsidies for EV manufacturers and buyers. He calls it a problem whereby these policies tend to benefit like big auto manufacturers and relatively well-to-do EV buyers. Citing a 2017 study by CarMax and Clean Technica, the survey states that the average EV owner is in general over 40 years of age, 7% college educated, and almost 70% making like $75,000 per year. Later he notes that the combined income of people who own like a Ford Focus Electric or Fiat 500e can be like $199,000 to $145,000 respectively. Now, let me stop here and do a reality check. Okay, yes, in Australia, electric cars are on average $10,000 to $20,000 more expensive than their ICE counterparts. How expensive? Like a Hyundai Ioniq is like $45,000, and Tesla's upcoming Model 3 will debut around $55,000, $65,000 at least. But if history is anything to learn from, know that when the Model T first came out in 1908, it cost, get this, $825 brand new. It was known as being as expensive and something for the wealthy, and it took Ford 17 years to bring the price down to a respectable $300. So salaries back then were like 18 cents per hour, and the average take home per year was $200. That made a Model T more than 4 times an annual income. So which if you believe Scott Pape's Barefoot Investor's advice, and I do, you shouldn't pay more than a third of your income on a car. Mr. Hayes' article went on to cite how unfair it is that $13 million of public tax funds are used to pay for EV chargers and a further $10 million to pay for the electricity that these will use. A quick side note from me, he didn't know that in America, where this article was actually published from, that in the US there are actually state and federal incentives and rebates to help consumers purchase electric vehicles. And they were like from several thousand dollars to $7,500. And in fact, many countries around the world do this and more, like cheaper annual registration costs. In Victoria, an EV qualifies for $100 discount on rego costs. Wow. Just wow. So they also get cheaper taxable income thresholds, allowances for driving for congestion areas, and more. But I diverge. If anything, this is actually helping his argument. So why do governments incentivize taxpayer dollars to these expensive electric cars? Well, first up, Latimer from the Sydney Morning Herald noted that electric cars continue to push into Australia despite a lack of government support, calling out the lack of federal subsidies, which have acted as a key driver for uptakes of EVs in other countries. Our adoption of EVs has only been about 6,000 so far, and it's been hampered by a lack of national charging infrastructure. Mr. Latimer goes on to quote that then Federal Energy Minister and now current Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, that the price is one of the key hurdles from people buying EVs in Australia. And in his own words, they have a poor level of uptake because electric vehicles are expensive compared to other cars. especially when like 13 out of 16 of them are available and they cost more than $60,000. So why is this? Well, just like with the Model T and technology in general, the cost of research and development and refinement is a costly exercise. Without economies of scale, that is, when the cost per unit of output decreases with increasing scale, cheaper EVs won't happen unless governments support them. But why is this important? Well, Royce Kurmelovs from The Guardian summarised a Senate paper released on Wednesday the 30th of January 2019, noting that Australia's paltry electric car uptake will cost health, jobs and the environment. And as we're on the cusp of a transport revolution, this country will miss out if it doesn't end the policy vacuum that has so far kept the electric vehicle industry from growing. Drawing from earlier comments, the paper cites that electric vehicle uptake lags behind that of other comparable countries due to a relative absence of overarching policy direction from the Australian governments. Quoting the report, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, cost savings for vehicle operators, increased job opportunities and economic growth, improved health outcomes, and increased fuel security are just some of the benefits that Australia can realise as EV use begins to climb. The report has 17 recommendations, including a dedicated task force developed to get a plan together, national targets to encourage uptake of electric vehicles, and more. The Climate Council's paper last year worryingly finds that transport is Australia's second largest contributor to greenhouse gases. So, knowing that EVs are 5 times more efficient than ICE cars, imagine a reduction in CO2 of 80%. This assumes that every EV owner is filling up with dirty coal or other fossil fuels. No, this number improves significantly if they actually use solar or other green forms of power generation. So, getting back to the article, in polling released Wednesday by the Australian Institute, it surveyed more than 1,400 people across the country on specific policies to support the uptake of electric cars. And it found that almost 4 in 5 said that they wanted the government to expand the network of charging stations and to ensure that new cars sold in Australia were more fuel efficient, even if they cost more. Next, Jeff McMahon from Forbes magazine did a great job showing how electric vehicles benefit all utility ratepayers. And what came to surprises me, he cited Max Sternberry from Advanced Energy Economy that people paying for EV charging are also benefiting non-EV owners to the tune of $2,500 per year. What? How? So, it states that as you increase electricity sales for charging the vehicle, it has the effect of driving down the rates for all ratepayers because it actually spreads the fixed costs of the actual infrastructure out across a larger area of sales. So, recalling last week's episode, wherever that is, about how our national grid, the world's largest, is in need of support and development. So this is indeed encouraging news. Finally, an article by Royce Kurmelovs also delves into Australia's electric car infrastructure stalled by policy paralysis, where in the next year, federally, only $6 million is going to be invested in public infrastructure. But other states like New South Wales is helping to the tune of $5 million, Victoria $2.3 million, and WA $100 million projects on the cards. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is wealth transfer, if you ask Jason Hayes from the McMahon Centre. But is it? Now, did you know that in Australia, $12 billion in taxes every year go to fuel companies? In addition, car makers like Ford and Holden have also received a fair amount of dosh that could have been better spent on electrifying their fleet and thereby generally creating jobs, new competition and cheaper products for all people to buy. But no, Mr. Hayes only focuses on taxpayer subsidies like that proposed for the $113 million of charging infrastructure, but neglects to point out about, the big oil, fossil fuels. No, my gosh, it's just so frustrating. So, all right, calm down. The point I'm trying to make is this. Subsidies exist to help companies employ people and bring down the cost of their products, thereby enabling almost all taxpayers the opportunity to buy an EV. The benefits of EVs are well known, helping manufacturers to reduce costs, help with the research and development and all this capital expenditure, benefits everyone. Consumers win too when subsidies are used to aid in the purchase of EVs, as they represent an 80% reduction in our CO2 emissions, which improves the quality of the air we breathe, as well as making the environment so much easier to live in. And by showing the public who might not know what EV charging looks like, P.S. it isn't a service station, this addresses the big issue of range anxiety and the reluctance to jump into EVs, as they'll note that, look over there, that's a Tesla supercharger. Oh, look at my mall, there's another charger there, I can use that. So, before I wrap it up, let me ask you that if you are enjoying this episode, please consider subscribing or giving a video a like, shooting me a comment below, or sharing this on your socials. Thanks in advance. So, Mr. Hayes, whilst in an ideal world, no one should receive subsidies, but they happen to exist for good reason. But I think your focus shouldn't be on the 1% expenditure on EVs and charging. No, I think you should go after legacy car companies who aren't actually investing in cleaner, greener forms of transport. And actually, let's target those fossil fuel subsidies, right? And why are they getting them? Like, they're making billions of dollars in profit every year. So this is truly a case of where they're taking the money from the poor and giving it to the rich and, well, shareholders. So beyond the reach of today's show, by the way, is the fact that there are many private car companies out there that are actually making electric vehicles, and they're installing EV charging stations around the country, from the obvious ones like Tesla, but through to motoring groups like NRMA, RACWA, Energy Queensland, ChargeFox, ChargePoint. There's more, but I diverge. What I hope I've demonstrated today is that governments need to do more about climate change, and one way to do this is by changing the way we move about. Our elected public officials need to set targets and incentivize people into EVs. Looking at you, Labor and coalition parties who refuse to include targets for EVs in your Senate report. To do so requires subsidies far greater than what is currently being offered, especially in Australia. Moreover, public charging infrastructure is desperately needed to support them. And then, maybe just then, the tide will turn and economies of scale will hit, as it did for the Model T. And just then, maybe, subsidies for electric vehicles can end.